Good morning. As we continue on day 287 with our study of St. Mark's Gospel and the parts of St. Mark that were copied into St. Matthew and St. Luke's Gospels, today we find Jesus facing, unexpectedly, a rather hungry crowd in several different senses of the word. We're reading today from Mark chapter 6, verses 30 to 44. The apostles came back to Jesus with a report about everything that they had been doing and teaching. And he said to them, "Come away by yourselves to somewhere away from people and have a rest for a while." They needed this because so many people were coming through and they had no spare time even to eat. So they went off in a boat to a secluded place by themselves. But a lot of people saw them setting off and knew where they were going. On foot, they ran there from all the towns and got there first. As Jesus got out of the boat, he saw how big the crowd was, and he felt compassionately towards them because they were just like sheep without a shepherd. So he started teaching them many things. It grew late, and his disciples came to him and said, "It's isolated here and getting late. Hadn't you better send them into the country and to the villages around here to buy themselves some food?" But he answered them, "Why don't you give them something to eat?" They replied, "It will cost us a fortune to buy enough bread to feed this lot." And he said to them, "How many loaves have you got? Go and find out." They found out how many they had and told him, "We've got 5 and 2 fish." And then he told everyone to sit down in groups on the spring grass. They sat down in groups of hundreds and 50s. Then he took the 5 loaves and 2 fish in his hands. He looked up to heaven and blessed God, and divided the loaves, and gave them to the disciples to hand to the people. And he shared the 2 fish with them all in the same way. They all ate and were satisfied. Afterwards they picked up 12 basketfuls of broken bread and fish. Those who had eaten the bread amounted to 5,000 families. How nice it is to see Mark bestowing the title of apostle on the disciples, returning from their first attempt at being teachers and healers. It was Mark's recognition of a change in their status. Up to now they had been disciples, which means pupils or students. Now they were called apostles, meaning messengers or couriers with a message and powers to take to others. What Jesus wanted to give them, now that they were back, was some time off, time to rest and reflect on what they'd experienced in their new roles. The crowd, however, had other ideas. They knew where Jesus was likely to take the apostles. And as Jesus gets out of the boat at the deserted spot, the crowd had got there first. Once again, we might see the memories of St. Peter being shared with Mark. Jesus and the disciples were looking forward to some time off for rest and reflection away from the crowds. But any disappointment that Jesus and the apostles felt when they saw the crowds waiting for them was quickly swallowed up by Jesus' pity for them. Sheep without a shepherd may well have been how Peter remembered Jesus describing the crowd's helpless bewilderment. It is typical of these stories, originating with Peter, that they contain a lively dialogue between Jesus and his companions. When they point out that the people must be getting hungry, Jesus asks them what they themselves, freshly back from their mission, were going to do about it. This is something all believers have been called to do ever since. asking God to solve a problem does not absolve us from doing something about it ourselves. Like the head of a household breaking the bread with a blessing at a family meal, Jesus takes one of the small loaves and breaks it prior to asking the disciples to share it out. Lots of commentators have tried to explain how so many might be satisfied by so small an amount of food. Some have said that the feeding was quasi-sacramental and that the crumb each person ate equated with a spiritual satisfaction. Others have suggested that the beginning of the distribution caused people to fetch out their own rations to share, as Jesus had just demonstrated. Mark and his source Peter give us no such explanations. For them, it was a miracle. They used the fish baskets from the boat to clear up afterwards and filled a dozen of them with leftovers. Mark saw this as an expression of Jesus' compassion for the hapless crowd and a sign of who Jesus really was. Taking bread and sharing of bread was, of course, later to be repeated at the Last Supper. And by Mark's time of writing, about 40 years later, the Eucharistic liturgy was a regular part of Christian devotion. This may well have shaped the order of events described here by Peter and Mark. And it does give another dimension to us today in our understanding of what is happening at the Eucharist. When we feel like sheep without a shepherd, at the Eucharist Christ feeds us and reminds us of his compassion for us, that he is in us and we are in him. Tomorrow we find Jesus once again in contention with scribes and Pharisees. This time what sparks it all off is the observation that the disciples didn't wash their hands in the properly prescribed manner before meals. I'll see you tomorrow.